Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final CARE EU level online talk. My name is Martin Bogdan from the Academic Cooperation Association in Brussels, and I will be your host today in this online talk, which will deal with the labor market integration of researchers with refugee background at the European level and in different European countries. As you can see in my next slide, today's overview of the online talk is that we will start with the welcome and introduction to the CARE project, where we will briefly present our findings and recommendations, and then we will move on to the short presentations and a panel discussion by our guests today, which are Marlène Bartès from the European Commission, Orla from Scholars at Risk Europe, and Abdirashid Ismail from the Migration Institute of Finland. After their brief presentations, we will move on to the panel discussion, where they will be asked, each of them will be asked 3 questions for the panel discussion, and this will also feed in then to the discussion with the audience, where all of you are welcome to participate. Just a few housekeeping remarks in the beginning. As we are in the CARE meeting, please keep your cameras turned off and keep your microphones muted. In the part which will be open to the audience, discussion with the audience, you are more than welcome to turn on your cameras and to join with video to ask a question or to present. I would just ask you, in order to get the floor, to write your name into the chat, and we will give you the floor to ask the question. And another option to ask the question is throughout the panel discussion to raise the question publicly, and then the question will be picked up in the panel discussion or later in the discussion with the audience. In case some of you want to ask a question anonymously, please feel free to write to me, so Martin Bogdan, in the chat privately, and I can raise your question on your behalf without mentioning your name. Thank you very much. So now we can start with a brief introduction to the CARE project. As you can see in my next slide, the CARE is stands for Career Advancement for Refugee Researchers in Europe. It is a Horizon 2020 Science for Refugees initiative funded project, which started in January 2019, and it is ending quite soon in December 2020. So its main objective is to support the integration of researchers with refugee background into the European research labor market. We're doing this through needs-based guidance and provision of relevant information on employment requirements in the 10 European countries, which are the target countries. You can see them in the slides where they are listed. We also have support networks which consist of the ACA members, Scholars at Risk national sections, and the Euraccess portal and the Euraccess national sections. The project is run by Academic Cooperation Association in Brussels, by the German Academic Exchange Service, DAAD, and by Finnish National Agency for Education, EDUFI. And our advisory board are DIKU, Norwegian National Agency for Internationalization, SAIA, similar organization in Slovakia, Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, and the Scholar Rescue Fund. So just a brief timeline of the project, which you can see in my next slide, is that we started in 2019 with stakeholder mapping of key stakeholders in integration of researchers with refugee background in Europe, by which we followed with the focus groups conducted with the target group, with the researchers themselves in 10 of the European countries. And this also in parallel was following the employer survey, where we wanted to ask the employers both in private and both in public sector who are employing researchers with researchers in general, actually, what are the advantages of having this target group employed, and what are some of the disadvantages, what are the challenges, and so on. Based on all of that, we have produced the country guides with all the relevant information for researchers with refugee background. which are available at our website, and you can find the link in the chat. In parallel to the country guides, we are also conducting the CARE online talks, which we've conducted 10 so far for each of the target countries with very specific support and information relevant to these countries, where we had really learned a lot also from the stakeholders, from the professionals working in this field, and from the researchers themselves. This is the last online talk and the final event of the project, where we are in a way summarizing all of this information. So now I would like to give the floor to my colleagues, first from EDUFI and then from DAAD, to present us the activities and key findings from the first from the focus groups and the employer survey report. So I would please give the floor to my colleagues from EDUFI, Outi Tomperi and Sara Paulainen.
Yes, thank you, Martin. So if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the aim of the focus group discussions was to map the needs, interests, challenges and experiences of researchers with refugee background who are navigating the research labor markets in 10 different European countries. And in the CARE project, this term researcher with refugee background is understood widely, including displaced scholars, scholars from crisis areas, and researchers under international protection. Next slide, please. Thank you. In total, there were 54 participants in the focus groups, and they represented 19 different countries of origin, with the majority of the participants from Turkey and Syria. And the focus group participants were at different stages of their research careers, and they rather evenly represented the 3 target research profiles, which were from first stage researchers writing their doctoral thesis up to recognized and established researchers. Next slide, please. Many of the issues and themes raised by the researchers were common across the 10 European countries, and here are 4 main messages from our focus group discussions. The target group should first and foremost be seen as researchers in their field and for their merits, and not as refugees. And although there is a clear need for tailored and targeted support, this should not diminish their role and profile as researchers. Secondly, it is important to make the diversity of the research community visible, and at the same time to change and diversify the image of the refugees so that it is understood that refugees can also be highly skilled researchers. And in many countries, the focus is on recruiting and attracting highly skilled workforce from abroad, but European countries should acknowledge the expertise among the persons already living in their countries in order not to lose any human potential. Thirdly, it is important to be mindful and to remember that not everyone has a similar academic background, nor do they follow the same career paths. And often the situation would ameliorate already significantly by remembering the diversity of the scholars in general and paying attention to accessibility and inclusion. And this should also be done by critically reviewing the recruitment processes. Fourthly, there is a clearly identified need for targeted support for researchers with refugee background, which should be recognized, addressed, and intensified throughout Europe. There are already many initiatives and support programs, but the target group is not always aware of them. So therefore, intensifying the promotion and visibility of existing initiatives is needed, as well as creating new strategies in order to better reach out to the target group. And when it comes to the colleagues who have not yet finalized their PhD, they are currently excluded from many existing support programs, and this should be addressed. And more specifically, there is also a recommendation to introduce an EU-wide support program for at-risk academics to ensure availability in all European countries. And these were just some of the key findings, and there are many other important observations and recommendations from the focus groups. So if you're interested in the topic, we recommend you to browse through the report. And there are also other recent reports on this topic, and our findings and recommendations are very much in line with, for example, the mapping report of the InspirEurope project. But now my colleague Sara will continue with the results of the employer survey. Thank you.
Thank you, Outi. So, in order to explore employers' view on this topic, we conducted a survey with an objective to collect relevant information on the labour market conditions and requirements for at-risk scholars in the 10 target countries. The survey was targeted for those organizations and companies who first of all employ researchers, and for both employers who have previous experience on employing at-risk scholars, as well as those employers who doesn't have previous experiences yet. We also targeted organizations with expertise on the research labour market and or on the opportunities for researchers with refugee background. All in all, we had 104 respondents from the target countries. And in terms of positions, most of the participants represented quite naturally management and HR services. And most of the organizations responding to the survey were universities or research centers. And unfortunately, there was only a quite small number of companies responding. We think that this can be seen to mirror the visibility and awareness of the need of support activities for this target group, especially in the academic sector. Next slide, please. So here we have collected some of the main messages concerning the employer survey and its results. The full report includes plenty of other results and recommendations, so we highly recommend to check the report for more information as well. But first of all, one of the main messages raised by the employers was that they do not differ nor recognize researchers with refugee background as a separate group in a way that would have an impact on the recruitment process. This can be seen, of course, as a positive factor, as the researchers are evaluated on the equal basis with others, based on their achievements and skills, not on their background. However, on the other hand, this could lead to a situation where the needs for targeted support and the specific challenges the researchers of this group encounter can be then overlooked. The second finding raised from the survey is strongly connected to the first one. So the recruitment is always based on professional skills. The respondents emphasize that professional skills and qualifications are the most important aspect when hiring employees, and organizations generally hire the best applicant despite of his or her background. The immigration status of the researchers is not relevant in the hiring process. However, this message partly contradicts with the recruitment experiences that at-risk scholars have had in the target countries. Moreover, while strong competition for research positions in the target countries is recognized as a general feature of the research labor markets, scholars often had felt discouraged when there is no responsiveness at all from employers' side. So clearly there might be a need to review the recruitment processes more critically. Then thirdly, according to the survey, the significance of targeted initiatives providing support and connecting the scholars with the employers proved to be in a central role. Most of the scholars indicated in this survey were hired through intermediary body, which in the most cases was a funding program targeting scholars with refugee background in particular. Consequently, there is evidently a strong need for further funding from both employers and research side, and also for targeted support measures at European level. And then finally, the last message is linked with the private sector's role. As we had quite limited number of respondents from private companies, it is still clear that private sector could have more significant role as an employer for the group. R&D companies do research and they need researchers. And also in the light of fierce competition in the research field, researchers need positions. So companies could be more significant employer than they now are. So it would be recommended to increase awareness in the private sector towards the topic, and also to create links between companies and researchers, and intensifying, for example, cooperation with companies in the existing support programs for at-risk scholars to improve their employment opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oti. Thank you very much, Sarah. I will just briefly now introduce the country guides that we have recently published on the project's website. So country guides contain relevant information for the researchers with refugee background for each of the target countries, and they can be accessed on our website. They contain a general overview of the research landscape in those countries, but also specific links to specific initiatives and links to specific websites where help can be found, where organizations who work in this field can assist the target group. They were validated by the country experts. Two per country, and one would come usually from a professional organization working in this support, and the other one would come from the target group themselves. So I would like to invite all of you to have a look at the information there and to use it. Also, if you come from some of these countries and you think some of the information might become outdated, or there are new initiatives relevant on reporting, I would kindly like to ask you to let us know, to write us at care@akasecretariat.be, the email that will be that is in the presentation that will be shared with all of you later, and because we plan to keep this country guides alive well beyond the time of the project. And now, next to the country guides, what we have been doing in the last few months were these online talks. And I would like to invite my colleague Georg Kravitz from the German Academic Exchange Service, DAAD, to present briefly the main points that we have learned in the last 10 online talks. Georg, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin. Yes. As has already been mentioned, CARE online talks, 11 altogether, were on the agenda of the DAAD. Next slide, please. So 10 have been conducted country-wise, and one online talk is dealing with an overview on the EU level, which is the one that we are doing today. So what were the objectives of these online talks? We wanted to provide information on employment and funding opportunities in the respective countries, and to discuss the results and findings from focus group interviews as well as from employer surveys. Furthermore, we wanted to share relevant country-specific information and gather input, and to highlight suggestions on how support measures at national and European level should look like. A, for researchers with refugee background, so the focus group we're dealing with, and with respect to institutions and corporations which are active in this field. Next slide, please. The focal points of discussion were to provide an overview on activities and initiatives, as was mentioned at national level, to support researchers and organizations and institutions active in this field. Then secondly, to share concrete examples on how support structures and measures for researchers inside and outside of academia look like, basically what works, what doesn't. To discuss challenges and possible ways to overcome obstacles and barriers. To reflect on, so to say, alternative pathways and support instruments for the target group beyond mainstream, and to outline key issues for a successful integration of researchers with refugee background or researchers at risk in the research and development labor market. So we always try to bear in mind when we were doing these online talks that there is a national, an institutional, and an individual perspective that needed to be taken into account. Next slide, please. To summarize the outcomes for the national institutional level on the left side of this slide, short-term funding programs can initially help and do initially help to integrate, but there is a need for transition from these rescue programs to regular programs. There are several support and guidance programs existing, be it short-term or long-term, on national and institutional level, but more synergy and coordination amongst these initiatives would be beneficiary. There are contact and consultation points available. They are sometimes more visible than other times, so more visibility would be helpful as well. And plus the, so to say, official help and guidance and advice that is provided, peer-to-peer mentoring for coaching and advice would be advantageous, meaning that people who have been in a similar situation as the ones that are dealing currently with their situation would help, because then there is a quite proximity between those with a little bit more experience and the ones that are looking for guidance and advice. And the fifth recommendation was that it would be great to expand or create a new exchange program aiming at the researchers with refugee background in particular and their specific demands. This could be within Erasmus Plus, for instance. That was a recommendation as well. Looking at the individual level, the personal commitment and flexibility of the people who are researchers at risk or researchers with refugee background is key. Networking helps a lot with integration, be it within the peer group or within researchers who are working in the field already. Language proficiency was mentioned nearly always. It is important, and in many cases it is a must. So the smaller the entity where the researchers want to become a part of and want to be working in future time, the smaller the entities is, the more important is the language issue on the national level. I've now here given two very short quotes: "Work hard and be resilient," that were taken from some of the online talks which we did. So there is always the demand for the individual to be very much committed to what he or she is going to achieve. And finally, to be open to alternative career paths or have a plan B in mind should always be an option in order to enlarge the chances and options for integration into the research and development labor market. Thank you very much from my point, and I'm handing over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Georg. A lot of feeding in for the speakers to reflect upon. And now I would like to move on the part where we will hear short presentations from our speakers. And I would like to start with Marlène Bartès from the European Commission. Marlène is working in the European Commission since 2013. She worked in the international cooperation focusing on education and training, mostly on countries outside of Europe. And now she is working in the unit for Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, also on support for researchers at risk. So Marlène, I would like to give the floor to you for a brief presentation of the EU-wide programs of support for the researchers at risk. As we just heard from Georg, there is a clear need for a transition from this rescue programs, as we say, to a more systemic support for the target group. So I would like to give the floor to you for your presentation, and then we will move on.
Okay, great. Thanks, Martin. Thanks for having me here today at this final event of the CARE online talks. I'm sure I will learn a lot from the discussions today, and I'm really looking forward to that. Yes, very briefly. So I think I have around 5 minutes just to give you a little bit the European perspective. Well, first of all, I think it goes without saying, for us, it's very important to allow researchers from any background to come to Europe. which is an invaluable gain not only for Europe, but also for, or eventually then for the countries where these researchers come from. I think the findings from the CARE project that we have just heard and seen, but also the findings from the InspirEurope mapping study, which will be presented just after me, show that the main obstacles for the integration of researchers at risk or with refugee background for the integration in the labor market are basically the shortages of funding for fellowships or positions available specifically for researchers at risk, but also the overall competitiveness of the European labor market or research labor market. So it's not only researchers at risk who face or who struggle to integrate the labor market, but researchers at large. But this, I think Orla, who will speak after me, will present a little bit in more detail. Now at EU level, there is a new action plan, or there will be soon, I think on 24 November, a new action plan on the integration or on integration and inclusion, which is part of the recently adopted Pact on Migration and Asylum. This new action plan will actually replace an existing one, which was adopted in 2016, and it has a slightly broader scope. And the main, I think, objective is to unlock the potential of migrants and ensure that they can participate to the fullest of their capabilities in society. Now, two things are interesting under this action plan for the discussions also today, is that there are two areas covered by the action plan, which focus on education and employment specifically. So with concrete actions actually at Commission and member state level on how to take these things forward. I mean, for education, for instance, we're talking about better recognition of qualifications acquired in third countries, which I think is important in the discussions today, but also, for instance, language training programs. And I think language training, as we've seen, well, in the CARE project, but also in the InspirEurope project, is also sometimes a big obstacle to successful integration. When talking about researchers at risk, I think we also need to talk about or link it to the general or broader discussion on academic freedom. I think it's very timely actually to talk about this, because just yesterday we had the Rome ministerial communique that was adopted, and their academic freedom features prominently. Academic freedom is at the core of all higher education policies developed at EU level. And I think you can also see this in two recent communications that were adopted, the European Education Area one and the European Research Area one. So they were both published, I think, in September, and they both put a strong emphasis on the promotion and defense of common values and academic freedom. So this, together with discussions under the European Higher Education Area, so within the Bologna process, I think it shows that there is enhanced awareness of this issue at policy level, so both national but also EU policy level. So that's, I think, a positive development. Now, more specifically on EU programs, well, we will see in the discussions later on that there is no EU level support for researchers at risk per se, but there are several initiatives to support researchers at risk, ranging from policy guidance to peer support to financial support, and maybe most importantly to the provision of tools and best practices. All of these activities or initiatives are usually funded by, I would say, two programs, or at least that's the two I'm familiar with. So the Horizon 2020 program for research and innovation, and then the Erasmus Plus program for education, training, youth and sport. So under these two programs, we have funded several projects focusing on the integration of refugees, And I think a lot of the projects that we have funded can be or should serve as inspiration and can be replicated by other actors to increase the overall level of support. I think today's event actually, so organized by the CARE project, is a perfect example of this, as the CARE project itself is supported by Horizon 2020. Besides CARE, of course, there's also, for instance, the InspirEurope project, which we will hear about like right now or just after me. And I think these are perfect examples on how we can enhance cooperation across organizations and across the EU. For InspirEurope, actually, the project is funded under the MSCA, so the MSCA, sorry, I'm speaking jargon, the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, which are part of Horizon 2020. But so the MSCA, as we call them in short, they don't fund only support actions like the InspirEurope project. They also offer support directly to researchers, including researchers at risk. So just for those of you who are maybe not too familiar with the program, the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, so they fund or support the training, the career development, and the mobility of researchers in all scientific domains at all stages of career. So we have early stage researchers or experienced researchers, and from all over the world. So this means that actually it includes researchers at risk and researchers with a refugee background. Now, we are aware that it can be difficult for researchers at risk to apply for funding under the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, because it is a very competitive program focusing a lot on excellence. So we have heard feedback that it can be difficult for researchers at risk to apply successfully. We have tried over the past few years to make it gradually more flexible, to cater also for researchers mostly with refugee background. And now for the future program, we're looking at ways to make it also a little bit more flexible for researchers at risk. So I'm happy to discuss this maybe later on in the panel, since the time is short, and to maybe give you also a little bit an idea of what we are planning in future to support researchers at risk more specifically. Thanks, and over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Marlène. We will get back to some of the points you've raised later on. And now I would quickly move on to our next speaker, Orla from the SAR, which stands for Scholars at Risk Europe, where she is the program manager and also running the already mentioned InspirEurope project, which she will briefly present. Before that, Orla worked in a number of international NGOs for international cooperation, also for the Irish government and the European Commission in the fields of supporting international cooperation and development. So Orla, without further ado, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks to you and your colleagues at the CARE project for this lovely invitation to speak to you today at your final event. As you mentioned, I'm just going to give a short overview of the InspirEurope project that Uti and Sarah and Marlène have mentioned, and also looking at the mapping report that we have just recently published that highlights a number of issues around labor market integration for researchers at risk. And then I'll also just briefly look at some upcoming events and activities we have, and then we can get into more substantive issues as well during our panel discussions. So in my next slide, you'll just see an overview of the project itself. It's a consortium of 10 partners, funded, as Marlène said, under the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions Programme under Horizon 2020, and it will run for 3 years. So it'll end in August 2022. It's coordinated by Scholars at Risk Europe, which is the European office of the wider Scholars at Risk network, and we're based usually at Maynooth University in Ireland. Just to say the researcher and at risk, just to maybe just briefly talk about the definitions around that. So for researcher, it is using the MSCA definition, which is someone who's active in research, including training levels, and includes all stages of researchers, were they doctoral candidates or highly experienced researchers? And then on the at risk, this is defined under the MSCA program as researchers who are at risk in their countries of origin, whether that is due to discrimination, persecution, suffering, or violence, and are seeking refuge for those reasons or have already found refuge in Europe. And just to say, researchers at risk can include people who have refugee status or are in the asylum process, but the majority are outside of that system and would hold, for those in Europe, would hold temporary hosting visas through their host institution. The next slide just gives you an overview of the objectives of the project. I won't spend a lot of time on all of them, as we will, as I only have 5 minutes and we can talk further about it in the discussions. But just to highlight some key areas that are linked to today's discussions, we are working around policy making and informed policy making to strengthen support for researchers at risk. And further to that, is the recent mapping report we have published, and also we will be working next year and into early 2022 around dedicated policy recommendations, both to the European Union, but also to national governments as well, and other institutions, about how European support can be improved and strengthened for researchers at risk. The other area we're looking at is bridging the gaps between national and European support programs, and that's looking at programs that are currently existing, how those can be replicated. It's also bringing in new stakeholders, primarily those in the private sector or in industry, and trying to build cross-sectoral and cross-country links to support researchers at risk across Europe. We're also doing dedicated webinars and training for researchers at risk around their own career development. You can find these on the InspirEurope website under the webinars section for those ones that have already happened. I'm just sending you the link now to the website. We have also webinars for host organizations about how they can best tailor their support and support researchers that they are hosting over their hosting period with the institution. And we're also looking to grow the network of support to researchers at risk with the focus on Central, Southern and Eastern Europe. In my next slide, you will see a little bit about the mapping report that Uti and Marlène have mentioned. As has been said and echoes the CARE reports, the two key challenges facing researchers at risk that we have identified in our report relate to career development and funding, and that is around fellowships funding itself or positions, and also the general competitiveness of the research labour market in Europe. As Marlène has mentioned, at EU level, there has been some very noteworthy policy initiatives framed around protecting and defending academic freedom recently, which have include the Bonn Declaration on Freedom of Scientific Research made under the German presidency back in October, and as you said, yesterday's announcement by the EHEA ministerial group around fundamental values, and also the statement on academic freedom, and also the Council of Europe will shortly be making a resolution on protecting of academic freedom and the autonomy of higher education institutions. And also, as Marlène has mentioned, the EU have given through Erasmus Plus and Horizon 2020 significant funding around career development support, network initiatives. But unfortunately, at the moment, there is no dedicated European level fellowship mechanism in the EU. And that is one of the areas that we have highlighted in the mapping report, and that we will be working towards over the rest of the project to try and work towards to see can this be realized. The report also looks at where there are good practices at the moment and what national states have in place programs. And these exist in France, in Germany, and in Finland, which we can talk about later in our discussions. And these do provide good practice guides and opportunities that could be replicated in other member states. And also there are a small number of dedicated initiatives in the subnational level and at institutional levels. And also a number of initiatives have been supported and established by and for Turkish refugees who have had to, or Turkish researchers at risk who have had to flee Turkey in recent years. And these include academics, in exile, the Off University and Birada also. And just to say, I know Uti mentioned earlier around a lack of awareness around supports for researchers at risk and those with a refugee background. And the InspIRE project related to this mapping report has done work around that whole area about resources. And we have a dedicated page on the InspIRE website and the InspirEurope website around resources for researchers at risk and those with a refugee background. And I will share that in the chat function later. And lastly, I just wanted to mention some upcoming events and activities of the InspirEurope project. We have a webinar coming up that some attendees may be interested in on the 9th of December. It's exploring this whole area of hosting researchers at risk in your organization and how you might be interested in exploring how you can make the most out of their stay. So for more information on that, it's on our webinars section and you can register for that there. Also, we will be having further to the discussions earlier around the need to share information and learning and cross-country learning on the topic. We are hosting our second stakeholder forum next April. This will be held in conjunction with the Philip Schwartz Initiative Forum of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation in Germany. This would have been in Germany, but we've made the decision to have it online due to obviously COVID restrictions, and further information on that will be coming shortly in the new year, and you can register for that at our events page. And we'll also be, as I mentioned, working towards those policy recommendations, and we will be doing work on this and a consultation process in 2021, and to look at having those recommendations towards the end of 2021 into 2022. So if you are interested in participating in that process and also in future events of the project, please do register for our mailing list at inspireurope@mu.ie. I know we'll have time for more discussion in the chat and in the panel discussions later. So I will leave it there for now. And my last slide is just my contact details for anyone who would like to get in contact with me personally after the meeting today, and also just for updates on the project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Orla. Yes, once again, the presentation will be shared after the online talk, so everyone can look for further information and the contact details. A lot has been said already, and I think we're fitting really nicely into the discussion. I would like to move on to our third speaker now, to Abdirashid Ishmael from the Migration Institute of Finland. He is a researcher who is focusing on immigration and diaspora studies, and also the political economy of the conflict and state formation. And what here we are really interested to hear is some of his reflections, having in mind that he is focusing on transnational migration, family well-being, and integration and asylum policy. And he is also professionally active in Finland at the moment at the Migration Institute, and before he was working at the University of Helsinki. So Abdirashid, I would like to invite you please to share some of your thoughts and reflections on this topic and on what was said already, and then we will move on with the panel discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Martin, and thank you for having me today. My task today is to reflect on the current situation in Europe, but I will use Finland as my case study. As you have heard, that my knowledge is quite specific into the Finnish system. And to start with, let me say this. And in what I think, European labor markets are in general failing the skilled refugees and asylum seekers, including researchers with refugee background. I know that authorities are trying to devise effective policies and plans to overcome those integration challenges. But these policies and programs produced, yes, it has been found, and I will elaborate a bit more about that, produced benefit and some pluses for the integration. But in general, they are considered as failed programs in terms of attaining their objective goals. So consequently, what happened is that skilled migrants with refugee backgrounds are still in a less advantaged position in the European labor markets, especially in the research and academia circles. I say so because, as I said, I use Finland as my case study. I've been living here for over nearly 30 years, and I do work as a researcher with refugee background by myself. Yeah. When I came here in Finland in early 90s, there was no what we now call as research integration programs and policies. We don't have that kind of programs here in Finland at the time. So when I came here, it took me well, I had some university studies at that time. And then I tried to get an admission to the university, and it took me 4 consecutive years of extensive work to get an admission to the university. 4 years. So you can see how the integration was operating at that time. For the last 20 years, Finnish authorities devised a number of integration programs and policies. Specifically, those policies and programs were, particularly the later ones, were personalized integration plans, I would say. So it was concentrating on integrating the individual immigrants into the labor market. Yeah. So the research findings indicate that those policies and programs, as I said, they were perceived as positive. There is benefits in it, but yeah, they didn't produce the required results yet. There are a number of challenges in the labor market in general in Europe and in Finland in particular. I could mention specifically the lack of recognition of the qualifications of the researchers and skilled immigrants, particularly those with a refugee backgrounds. Is still a challenge here in Finland. 2 other elements that I would like to mention are that might be quite relevant here in Finland is in the Finnish labor market is that one is the discrimination, and it has been found, and even more recent literature research findings show that still discrimination is a barrier for immigrants, particularly those with refugee backgrounds, and there are other layers like being Black, being Muslim, being non-European. All these are challenges that are overburdening the refugees who want to enter into the labor market, particularly in the skill level. Another element that is important here is the network and established contacts. That are very essential in the entry level into the labor market. Let me come to what's going on in the research sector. In Finland, we have a main problem that we have in Finland, as has been mentioned earlier, or in somewhere else in Europe as well, is that we have too many skilled people, a large pool of PhD holders. So the supply is there, and we have, on the other hand, we have a very limited demand. Universities and research institutions can absorb a very limited number of people, so that their capacity is very limited. So that's one problem. It's not for migrants only, it's for everyone. Everyone, every researcher in Europe, in Finland, I mean, is facing that challenge. Another element that is important is that access to employment in the research sector is based, as I said, in informal and invisible processes that the so-called gatekeepers are quite essential, and they have a big role in there. Most research research positions are particularly for the inter level are employed through external funding. That's another problem, external funding rather than the resource by the universities and research institutions. So those resources are employed by those who already participated in the planning process. So like writing the proposal and so forth. So the newcomers have no role in that, or at least they have a limited role. Another phenomenon that is present here in Finland is that in the research sector, I mean, is the so-called internal recruitment. Most of the people are employed in the research institutions that they were there, they have done their doctoral studies or the last studies. So they are recruited through internal processes. So that's tells that being a stranger in the research sector in Finland, and I would say the European general, is an unfortunate for everyone. And it's an exceptional burden, burden to migrants and refugees. So let me say and conclude that all these elements that I've mentioned need to be addressed by the future policies and initiatives. So I think we are running out of time. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abdirashid, for this critical reflections, which I think will be very helpful in the panel discussion where we are transitioning now. So as you can see in the next slide, we have here 3 questions that will be raised for the panel. Question number 1 will be, how would the European approach to labor market integrations of researchers with refugee background and at risk look like? What would be the scope, impact, and challenges? And then we will move on to different national approaches and how to maybe combine them with the European approach. And then finally, we will discuss linkages with the private research and development sector, where there has been also a lot of challenges, also in the care projects in terms of reaching out to the employers, but from what we heard in the recent InspirEurope's webinar on presenting the mapping report, I think we kind of face similar challenges. So I would like to invite all of the speakers to turn on their cameras and to join us for the panel discussion. Maybe Abdirashid, if I can start with you. I see you've been turned off at the moment. Until we get him back, maybe Orla or Marlène, whoever wants to start on the what would the European approach to labor? Abdirashid is back. Abdirashid, I would like to ask you, yes, how to use the experiences you have and the research you've conducted on Finland, which showed a lot of challenges. How can maybe perhaps this experience be used in developing maybe a European approach to the labor market integration? How can we overcome these steps, not to perhaps repeat them again on a policy level?
There are currently there are a number of initiatives that has been started here in Finland, for instance. These initiatives are one of those is that the role of the private sector. So that like a project called CIP, and it is the goal is to link or to make a connection between the employer and the employee, the migrant. Mm-hmm. So to make that kind of matchmaking and also to shorten the time limit of the employability of the new migrant. So that's one possibility. That, well, there is no component for all those initiatives. There's no component for the refugees with researchers with refugee background. We don't have that yet, but they are intended for the skilled migrants. And so this can be, there might be a possibility. And even in that the project, the CIP project, there is an EU investment fund is one of the funder of that project. So those initiatives, we can it can be looked at the possibility that, for instance, universities can be given a chance for to play in that place. Like as private companies have been given a role, then universities can be given, because the EU and the Finnish government are involved in there, and they are providing some sort of resources in here and there. So that's one possibility that I would suggest that. Unfortunately, they are in the initial stage, so we don't have the outcomes of those initiatives. But they look promising, I would say. Yeah, and I think I will be leaving soon. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes, yes, thank you very much, Abdirashid. Yes, just to announce, Abdirashid announced that he will need to leave soon for another appointment he has.
I'm sorry.
So thank you very much for these reflections. They were very helpful, and unfortunately, we will have to continue without you in the panel. But we are looking forward to stay in touch and to
Thank you.
Hear from you
Thank
again.
you. Bye all.
Bye bye. Okay, Marlène, do you want to maybe continue from where he stopped in saying that different EU funding programs can be used? For instance, he mentioned, I think it was Invest EU, which is also, it was mentioned in a number of fora when discussing synergies among different European programs. So apart next to Erasmus and Horizon Europe, which are the first two that were discussed on this. The InvestEU was also one of the programs that was mentioned that could bring in some of the finances, but also maybe to link it with the private R&D sector.
Yeah, and I was wondering also if maybe Orla wanted to take the floor before me, because she wanted to mention this idea of a fellowship, of a dedicated fellowship scheme. So maybe it ties in quite well, and then I can just react to that proposal as well.
Sure.
Please go ahead, Orla. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, so I think as I mentioned in the presentation, and also as came through in the CARE project, there is a dedicated fellowship scheme for researchers at risk and those with a refugee background is clearly coming out as an identified need. And as Marlène said, there is obviously the MSCA fellowship schemes, and some researchers at risk have been very lucky and have received those, but it's a very competitive scheme. It's I think it's 12% success rate, and you need to score 92%, I think, to achieve it. So even researchers who are based in Europe and have all these, the access to, all the facilities they need and a stable career and don't have gaps in CVs struggle to get it. So it is quite difficult, and we have a spotlight on those challenges as well under MSCA for researchers at risk, and the challenges they face around the mobility rule as well, in that mapping report that I mentioned, which is available on the InspirEurope website. And that's what led us, following our consultation process, which was through discussions and interviews with researchers at risk, and also with support organizations, which included the CARE project, but with also the likes of Scholar Rescue Fund, the CARA project, or CARA organization in the UK, other scholars at risk networks in Europe and in the US, obviously. And it echoes the challenges that they've been encountering for a number of years around this issue of how best to support researchers at risk in Europe. And so that led us to, in our concluding chapter in the mapping report, to suggest the need for a dedicated EU fellowship scheme for researchers at risk, those with refugee background, but also looking at ways in which the EU could support those national level initiatives that we mentioned, and we're going to discuss later as well, that exist in France and Germany and Finland. And maybe there's a way within that we could also look to support those and encourage like a pilot scheme in which those could be supported. So that's the basis for the recommendation that we will be working with Marlène and colleagues in the EU, but also seeking support through the consortia and also through those interested in this area, to maybe join forces around how best we can lobby and advocate for this. But I think it's, and also related to that is, as Abdirashid mentioned and others have mentioned, the short-term nature of positions causes a lot of stress for researchers at risk and those with a refugee background. So ideally, we want to be working towards longer-term programs. Ideally, 3 years minimum, to allow a researcher at risk who has fled a very difficult situation to allow them to draw breath, to establish themselves in the country, also to support any family and all that, as well as trying to restart your career and develop those linkages. So the short-term nature of programs to date, while they're very useful and necessary and much needed, if we were talking about longer term support, ideally we're looking at multiple years of a program. So that's the background of what's not quite a recommendation. We will have in those policy recommendations coming later in the project, but it's an initial finding that we have from our discussions and with our collaboration with other organizations.
Yeah, thank you very much. This perfectly aligns with recommendations for an EU-wide dedicated scheme from the CARE project, but also I think in each and every one of the focus groups we had, the first thing that came to mind where there was funding support for the researchers with the refugee background, its time limitedness was the biggest challenge that they were facing, and actually what to do after the initial period of the scholarship. So Marlène, I would like to want to you now if you could elaborate.
Yeah, I'll just maybe react to that and the previous question. Yes, I think we are completely aware that existing programs do not completely cater for the needs of researchers at risk, so including refugees, but also those who hold more temporary work permits. I mean, the MSCA, as you said, it's a very competitive program. I mean, it's very difficult for any researcher really to get funding, so be they at risk or not. And then, of course, for them, it's one additional let's say handicap to apply if you have gaps, for example, in your publications, etc. Of course, it makes it more difficult competing with the world's best scientists for funding. You have mentioned that I've mentioned it before. You have also mentioned the mobility rule. I think it's true that the MSCA is not a program for researchers at risk, and I think that's what we need to keep in mind. It's researchers at risk are entitled to apply as anybody else. But we've still tried to make it a bit more flexible. For example, with the mobility rule, at least for those with the refugee status, so making it a little bit more relaxed there. I'm actually having, I think next week, a meeting with my colleagues to discuss how we can further maybe make the program flexible, not only for refugee scientists, but also for researchers at risk. One thing that we will do under the future program is to give a clear definition of what is a researcher at risk. I think it's important so that beneficiaries who apply for funding actually know that what we're talking about, and that this is something that the Commission finds important. So there is a clear definition in the draft work program that is still being discussed now of researchers at risk, and also encouraging beneficiaries to try and involve them more. For specifically the what we call now individual fellowships, but in the future we will call postdoctoral fellowships. And this was also one of the recommendations of InspirEurope. We would like to introduce like a tick box for researchers at risk, because I think one of the problems and the difficulties that we have nowadays is that it's actually very difficult to us to know how many people, researchers at risk, are currently benefiting from EU or national programs, simply because they can't declare themselves as researchers at risk. At least that's the case for the MSCA for now. So this is one of the small improvements we're going to do also in the future. This is specifically for postdoctoral fellowships, because there it's a researcher with the host institution who apply directly. When we look at the other actions like co-fund or doctoral networks, where the researchers are recruited at the later stage, so not we don't know the researchers at application stage yet. Here, I think it's important that beneficiaries are trained and guided on how they can recruit researchers at risk. And I think this is something that we might get back to you, the CARE project, but also InspirEurope, to see if maybe we could develop some specific guidance for beneficiaries. Really simple short document with some best practice, where to find useful resources, what to keep in mind, that it might take more time, or you might need face-to-face support for these types of researchers. So I think this could be an easy step to increase the participation of at-risk researchers in our programs. And then, but this I can mention maybe later, of course, we will also continue support to InspirEurope, of course, and a successor to take the work forward that has been done there. So that's more for the MSCA. Now, you mentioned a dedicated fellowship scheme. So yes, the InspirEurope project has prepared a very interesting document. I think consulting also quite widely amongst its members on giving an analysis of the current situation and suggesting exactly at the end more specifically a dedicated fellowship scheme, which would not fall under the remit of the MSCA. I mean, it's quite far from what we're currently funding, because we had originally thought that we might be able to just, I don't know if you're aware of the widening fellowships, for instance. So we thought we could maybe replicate something a little bit similar, meaning you just, for the widening fellowships, it's a separate budget from the MSCA, but we basically go down on the list, on the reserve list, and then we specifically target projects from widening countries with additional budget separate from the MSCA that we have. It wouldn't work the same way here, because as you said, actually for researchers at risk, we need different types of support, faster support, longer in time, so that they can, remain in a safe and stable environment. So I cannot make any promises here. I mean, we're of course, it's one of the recommendations that we received. Me personally, I think it would be very useful to have such a European-wide support scheme. It depends on basically if we receive financial support first, because such a program would be quite expensive. I mean, research is expensive. We see it under the Marie Curie, the budget that you need to fund a single researcher is quite extensive. So first we would of course need to secure funding for this, but also political support. So I think now what will be interesting is in the coming weeks or months to discuss with our colleagues in other directorates general who are more responsible for external relations. So not us, education, but really more the external relations DGs, and also DG Home, potentially DG Employment, to see a little bit with them if there's appetite and how this could be best organized. So I think, there might be more to come in the future, but no promises, unfortunately, so far. And then, yes, Martin, you mentioned InvestEU, Horizon Europe, the future Erasmus program. I think Synergies is kind of our buzzwords and favorite words. We're trying. I must say I haven't thought so much about InvestEU because that's a little bit more far from my portfolio. But at least for Horizon 2020 and Erasmus, as we also see it under the the ERA communication and the EA communication, I think synergy is kind of the new motto. And having a commissioner who deals now both with education and research will ensure at least that. So that's, I think, a very useful thing. We're also talking now about knowledge area rather than just European education and European research area. So something that really combines both. So yes, now that the MFF has finally, or the negotiations have finally for the future budget have finally sort of ended, I think we can really look more concretely into how to ensure these synergies.
Thank you very much, Marlène. And I would like to invite the audience also to put pressure on their national governments and their respective ministry, kind of to create the appetite, maybe if the appetite is not there yet, and to push.
Yes, please. If I can just double like that message, because it's easy. No, I mean, it's not easy. Like if it's just me showing up, knocking on the door of my colleagues saying we need to launch this new scheme, they might just turn it down. Whereas if we have, stakeholders and political support, so stakeholders talking to their national authorities, to their MEPs, etc., this would really help us convince, colleagues in-house to develop something new.
Mm. Great. Looking at the time now, I would like to move on to the question on the cooperation with private sector, so that we still have time for the discussion with the audience. This is something where we in the CARE project faced a few challenges in reaching out to them, also just to fill in the employer survey. And also, Orla, I'm aware that you are facing similar challenges as well. While at the same time, in the online talks and in the country guides, we have a number of initiatives that work on linking researchers, sometimes specifically with refugee background, with the private sector and with the universities. Now, this depends on the initiative. Sometimes they need to be affiliated with an institution, sometimes they don't. Orla, just maybe some of your reflections on this, how we could move this thing forward. I know that now in the COVID times, this is used as said that this is a reason not to push this forward. But I must admit that I haven't seen much initiative also before COVID a year ago.
Sure. Yeah, I think like from InspirEurope, it's also features prominently, as it does in the CARE reports. It features prominently with us around a need to explore and utilize opportunities with the private sector. And for us, we see, and I think same with CARE, the CARE project. Obviously, there's huge advantages from, we would see anyway, for private sector. Obviously, you've got highly skilled researchers in areas where Europe has skills gaps, and even more so now as the continent tries to rebuild from the impact of the pandemic. So I think that's a very strong argument that we can utilize. And also another secondary area has been the issue around diversity and inclusion, and the fact that this may also provide an opportunity for organizations looking to diversify and bring in fresh perspectives into their organizations. We've been reaching out and doing outreach on this to various companies, and it's, yeah, the responses have been, while they recognize the potential, it's COVID has been used, and even just there has been a little bit of retrenchment in terms of, we need to kind of recalibrate a bit. We need to look at our structures and that. But as you say, we know from other organizations, they have struggled on this that. I think maybe we need to look at identifying role models. I think we need to look at organizations that have employed researchers at risk and the benefits that has brought to the organization. And there has, we have some data on that. For our last stakeholder forum, the association, Bernard Gregory, did a number of workshops on moving and transitioning out of academia into the private sector. And I know they also spoke at your France country webinar as well. And there is some very useful information. I think there's probably a two-pronged approach here. There's obviously building that networks with private sector, but also providing information and support to researchers at risk and refugee researchers that might be interested in moving, and what are those skills. So I think maybe there might be some baby steps needed initially that private sector human resource departments, for example, could support around what are the skills, what are they looking for when they talk about having somebody in their R&D department, for example. What would they need, what skills? And then working with those that are interested in transitioning, how can we then best marry the two together? So I welcome thoughts from the participants as well. We will be taking this on very seriously and have been to date, and utilizing the findings from our mapping report, really looking at this area a lot more, and very interested to work with CARE in your last month on the project on this, but also working with Marlène and other European Commission colleagues around tying in with either Invest EU, but other initiatives. I believe DG Home have one around employers towards integration, and how we can, as Marlène said, that word around synergies, but this is obviously an area that the EU is looking at, especially now with the rebuilding tour after the pandemic, how we can join forces together. So as I said, this is an area that we think there is great area for collaboration and potential.
Indeed. Thank you. I'm looking at the chat now, and there's a question from Sinead O'Gorman if we can discuss the level of interest from the researchers themselves in opportunities outside academia. From what we found in the focus groups, there was a lot of, a lot of them tried to look for employment outside of academia, and only a few of them have been successful in this. And even less few of them were successful in finding jobs in research or development in the private sector. For one really positive example, I can point out to the online talk in Flanders in Belgium, where we had one researcher who is working part-time as a postdoc researcher at VUB. University in Brussels, and part-time he works in a larger retail company, so outside of academia, but not in the research and development department, but works in a managerial role. So I think there is interest from the researchers to find employment, but there's a lot of obstacles when it comes to support outside of to the field outside of academia, mostly with language requirements, I would say. And this especially is relevant for the countries where English is not the first language, and even more in the countries where more languages are official. For instance, Switzerland, that was very prominent, and Belgium also one of them. So that would be my answer to this. And I think we can also now open the floor, the discussion to the audience. And I would like, we already have a few questions in the chat, but firstly, I would like to give the floor to one of our colleagues, Peter McGrath, who is running a project on displaced scientists in Italy. And maybe Peter, if you're with us, I can see your, I would invite you to take the floor just to present the, hi, welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Good morning.
Morning. Here.
Thank you, Martin, for this opportunity. And of course, congratulations to you and the CARE team for your country guides that you've produced, and also to InspirEurope. It's been very informative hearing about what you've been doing. So that's great. So yeah, thank you to Martin. I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about something that we've been doing. Let me just say, I represent an organization, TWAS, the World Academy of Sciences. We're based in Trieste in the northeast of Italy. And TWAS, together with two international science organizations, IAP, the Inter-Academy Partnership, it's a global network of academies of science, and ISC, the International Science Council, based in Paris. Some of you might remember them as ICSU. So together we have a really global reach, and we're picking up this idea. The terminology, of course, is people have thought about it different ways. We're calling it refugee and displaced scientists, but I think the concept is the same for what we've been talking about. Some of our activities go back to 2017, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But more recently, we've activated a loose global network, a coalition, if you like, of interested bodies, interested organizations to come together to think how we might work together on a more global perspective. It seems Europe is reasonably well advanced in its thinking and starting to, as we've just heard from Marlène, just put together Europe-wide activities, which is great. but of course, a lot of the displaced scientists we're seeing are in African countries, moving across the borders. I mean, even now, Ethiopia into Sudan and things like this. So we're having this global perspective. So we did hold this workshop just a few weeks ago, and I'm going to paste a little link, just a short report into the chat there, so you can get an idea of the sorts of issues that we were covering. Going back to the 2017 event that I mentioned, we did come out also then with a report. And I've got another link here, which had a series of recommendations, many of them, I think, sort of echoing some of the ones that I've heard discussed today. We produced recommendations, the 3 or 4 for different constituencies for the private sector amongst them as well. So, but of course, the problem has been since then how to activate and motivate on some of these recommendations. And some of the things, I mean, Martin, you asked me to think, especially on the private sector issues, and some of what I was going to say has been said already. You talk about finding sort of role models and successful case studies to sort of flag up, I think is one way to do this. And then perhaps what we've been missing, and perhaps these webinars and virtual meetings gives us possibly even an opportunity to jump in, is targeting trade shows and these places where the private sector are meeting, not going door to door for every sort of individual company that might employ researchers, but trying to do a sort of scattergun approach, if you like, presenting something at a trade fair. One opportunity that also comes to mind, especially for the sort of biosciences industries, is an event that takes place every year in Lyon in France called BioVision. It's strongly supported by a lot of the companies based there in Lyon, Sanofi and others. And this, we've had dealings with them in the past as TWAS. We have a sort of on and off agreements with them. So this could be one opportunity. I think usually the event is held in April. So there might be a good chance to plan ahead a little bit and contact them and have a presentation and reach quite a number of companies in, like I said, in the pharma, agrochemicals type of industries there. I mean, this is something we can consider. Maybe I'll stop there. I know your time is tight, but we are open. Please contact us, and we'll stay in touch, of course.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think these were some really good ideas and very practical ideas on how to reach out the private sector. I would leave it there for a bit because I'm receiving some of the questions in my private chat, and actually I would like to give a floor to a researcher, actually Sana Zavskin, who would like to present a few ideas that she has. And also I can see in the chat that there were 2 questions regarding the gender aspects of this topic. I can say that in the country guides there is no dedicated gender section, but in the different sections, mostly in psychosocial support or other types of supports in different countries, there are initiatives who are focusing on women actually. So I would like to invite everyone to reflect, to go and check them. So Sanas, if you could take the floor briefly, and maybe if you can also reflect on the gender aspects of this.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for these online interesting talks. Last time there was a problem with my microphone. I couldn't share with you what I had in mind. Thank you for this second chance. Well, my research is also about the use of the process of integration of refugees. In fact, I'm doing a PhD research at the Department of Theatre Studies at the University of Groningen. I look at the use of theater as a tool for supporting refugees integration. It's an exploratory study on applied theater intervention with refugees, just to see that, to know their challenges and their impacts, and to see that to what extent they have been effective in terms of facilitating refugees integration. And what I realized in my research is that we sometimes forget that that integration is a two-way process, and this does not just mean that being willing to help each other, being open to each other, but it also means to recognize each other's contribution. So what I was going maybe to suggest is that these supporting programs are great. It's very important to help these researchers to find their way in the academic field, in the labor market, but maybe it's also these programs, these supporting programs, can work much better if they are accompanied by a research program that can address the contribution that these researchers with their particular background can have, because and see that how their contribution can benefit the academic field and the labor market of the host country. Because one of your researchers in the CARE talk in Switzerland had shared a very interesting example of a Syrian scholar who was teaching urbanism in the city of Aleppo before the war, during the war, and also after the war. That's a unique contribution. Or, for example, currently there are a lot of discussions about decolonizing fields of studies. For example, there is in our fields of study, in theater studies, and I know that there is the same in, for example, media studies. And these scholars with their background can have a meaningful, I think, contribution there. So I think that this research program can help because integration is a very painful process, and it's very easy just to see yourself as an excess weight, because you are a kind of an outsider, and it's not just about refugees, it's for all immigrants, but very much more complicated for refugees. But I think that this such a research initiative can be really helpful for host institutions, because if the contribution of these researchers is clarified and showed by research, obviously I think that more institutions will be willing to host these researchers, because they can see that this is a win-win situation, that both sides can benefit from this situation. And it can be also very helpful, I think, for the researchers themselves, because I think that when you are in a system in which your contribution is recognized and acknowledged, you will feel more confident, and you will more able to share your excellence with others. So I just thought that maybe just thinking about the supporting program, something will be missing. And it's also important to look at the contribution, at the added value that these researchers can have, and the European countries can actually benefit from it. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sana. Really good, I think, really good reflections, and a lot to discuss about. Orla and Marlène, I would like to give a floor briefly to both of you. If you could reflect on what Sana's and Peter also said, but also having in mind there is a discussion going on in the chat on the gender aspects of these issues, which are broad, of course. So just if you could.
I wholeheartedly agree, Sana, with exactly what you said. And we've outlined that in the mapping report. It looks at, from the host institution's perspective, the benefits that researchers at risk have brought to the organizations, and also what the researchers at risk can bring. And I think, again, it'll be something we'll be utilizing in our engagements throughout the project, highlighting that it's also the international element of research, what the research, the different perspectives it can bring to an organization, and looking at how and documenting the changes that it brings to organizations as well. And just to say, we're holding, as I mentioned, on December 9th, a webinar which looks at this whole area of hosting researchers at risk and how best they can be supported. So if you are available, Sanif, it'd be great to have your input for that, and others who are intending to circulate about that webinar to your colleagues, because it is about trying to share knowledge, share information about how best researchers can be supported at their host institutions to enable them to basically flourish their careers and grow and bring that multiple benefits that hosting can bring, both for them and also for the institution. Just on the gender impact, I think my colleague Sinead O'Gorman has just input on chat there. The InspirEurope mapping report looked at this area, and it's something we're going to be looking forward our coming months on this topic. To date, applications from female researchers at risk are a lot lower. Some of this we have to explore, but from analysis Scholars at Risk have done, it's a lot of it is due to in some countries, the lower number of female researchers that are engaged in certain domains and in certain countries. There's obviously, since the unrest in Turkey, there have been an increase in female Turkish refugees and researchers at risk looking for positions of refuge in Europe. But there are multiple challenges, and in discussions and in focus groups we've had, there's obviously the psychosocial support needs as well, and the traditional caring role, as well as if researchers at risk have families as well. But it is an area that we will definitely be exploring more in the project to drill down into those reasons of lower numbers of female researchers at risk applying and being supported in support organizations, and to look at how that can be supported. So if people are interested in this area, I'd ask them to contact InspirEurope again at InspirEurope or InspirEurope@mu.ie.
I love I love that Orla already said. I can only completely agree with what Orla just said, what Peter said, Sanat. I think very relevant comments. I was also going to refer to actually the mapping study of InspirEurope that Orla just said, that there's a whole section also analyzing the benefits of hosting researchers at risk. So I think we completely agree with your messages. And it also links again to, so not only does it help with the internationalization of institutions, but also with raising awareness on academic freedom. I think that's also one of the very big benefits of hosting researchers at risk. Orla mentioned this webinar, upcoming webinar, that I would also strongly really encourage you to attend. Also, I mean, for, yes, female participation, I think Orla said covered it all. There's also a small section, yes, in the mapping study. For us, I mean, from the MSCA side, the gender dimension is very important and strongly encouraged, and I think it works. So we have a very good male-female parity in the researchers we fund under our programs, but it's true that this is not necessarily reflected on researchers at risk, and more generally on, you know, concrete initiatives on how to better link with the private sector. I think here again the InspirEurope mapping study gives very good suggestions. I mean, you know, these partnerships, for instance, with private companies, or, you know, inviting speakers from the private sector, you know, doing more training on skills, transferable skills, you know, mentoring, these kind of things. I know it's part of your, I think, plans for the future to look more into these issues. And I think for us at European level, that would be very important. I mean, even for the successor of InspirEurope, be it InspirEurope or something slightly different or completely different, in the MSCA work program. So for the future program, this is actually one of the expected results we have in there. So really increased exposure of researchers at risk to the industry and the non-academic sector will be one of the of the results we're looking for under the successor of InspirEurope, but also, of course, building on what InspirEurope is already doing and will be doing in the future. So for sure, this topic will continue being discussed and looked into.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think today we've been talking mostly about broader issues without going into more details about other aspects like family reunification, psychosocial support, dual careers, etc., which are all part of the challenges that researchers are facing. I can also invite everyone to have a look at the country guides where we have dedicated sections for each of these thematic groups, and also in the focus groups, these things came out as almost, I would say, important as having access to the research funding. So also when we're talking about developing funding schemes, funding is only one part of the issues that the researchers are facing. The other issues are also very pertinent. I'm looking at the chat now with the questions.
Yeah, I see there's a question on maybe kind of brain drain. Brain circulation, which I think is it's relevant, and with links also a little bit to what Peter said earlier, that we're talking. I mean, are we talking only about Europe, or are we also talking about what's happening in other parts of the world? And I mean, just from the EU perspective, we do have a very strong international dimension to our programs. So I mean, if we look, for example, at the MSCA, it's actually the most international action under all of Horizon 2020. So there's a strong focus on involving partners outside of the EU or associated countries. It's the same for actually Erasmus+. There is a very strong international dimension, and there's, for instance, the capacity building in higher education action, which I think is very relevant in the context of now the discussion. And this focuses really on partner countries. So I mean, there's European institutions in there, but the impact of these projects is really for countries outside the EU. And then also there's, of course, the EU Regional Trusts Fund, MADAD, which supports access to university in the region neighboring Syria, for instance. So there are some funding and programs and projects that do focus specifically on partner countries, so that's not to steal all the bright minds and talents. Yes, and that's from the EU side.
Yeah, and just to say, Scholars at Risk and the other support organizations like Scholar Rescue Fund and CARA are obviously very conscious of this issue too, and have been looking at remote fellowships as well, and positions where is there ways in which researchers could be supported still within their home countries to obviously relieve that area of threat, but look at the remaining in the host country. And obviously something that we are looking at through InspirEurope, or the SAR-Europe also has a European advocacy project that we are working on, and linking in with ensuring that academic freedom are parts of, are embedded into EU programs with host governments as well, and ensuring respect for academic freedom within any agreements that are reached as well will be important to maintain and ensure that autonomy for higher education is valued and protected in the host country, or the country of origin for many researchers at risk, to ensure that they're not forced to flee in the first place, and to protect to protect the necessity to protect academic freedom in the countries of origin also.
Thank you. Peter, I know that TWAS is working in the countries outside of Europe quite a lot. So maybe do you want to give a few words on this?
Sure, and certainly we're working closely with the Scholar Rescue Fund, the Scholars at Risk, and so on. So we're well aware of the situation, and we're doing what we can, to assist them where possible. But yeah, I mean, what we would like to see is some of the thinking, the country guides that you've produced, taking those ideas forward for other countries where refugee scientists might be arriving. One can think of South Africa, for example, which has reasonably strong research capacity and certainly is a magnet in the Africa region, Malaysia, Thailand, and so on and so on. So I'm hoping we can sort of learn lessons from the things that you've been doing in these EU projects, and sort of through this network that we're trying to create, sort of expand on those lessons and make them more widely available for elsewhere. But this is certainly a global problem, yes.
Absolutely. Orla, you wanted to add something, or?
No, I'm okay. I'm okay. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yes, no, definitely. I mean, we're really looking forward to be part of this support network that you're planning to establish, and to see how to move these issues forward inside of Europe, but also outside of Europe. And sharing formats and sharing good practices is something that obviously I think everyone here is very much interested in. But now looking at the time, because we've past the dedicated time for this online talk, and I'm sure people have other things to do on a Friday. I would just like to say a very warm thank you to the speakers today, also to the audience who was very active today, but also I've seen a lot of familiar names in the audience who are working on these support programs throughout Europe. So thank you very much for following us. And as we are officially ending the project by the end of the year, this doesn't mean that we will stop being active in this field. We will be continuing the dissemination of the country guides, the reports, and the online talks further on, and we will still be active in different forums, and we will be happy to share all the experiences that we've gained in the last 2 years. So please do get in touch with us here using the contacts in the PowerPoint, which you will receive. And for any questions or linkages or for networking, we are happy to put you in touch with other relevant people and organizations, and also we'll be happy to steer these discussions. Also, finally, I would like to give a very warm thank you to all of my colleagues from EDUFI, and all of my colleagues from DAD, and also all of my colleagues from ACA who've been active in this project. Thank you very much. I think this was a very enriching 2 years of the project, and I think we've learned a lot from the researchers, we've learned a lot from the professionals working in this, and we're also very happy to continue to be active in the field. So thank you very much, everyone. I wish you all a very nice Friday afternoon and a very nice weekend ahead. Thank you for following us, and goodbye.